In the vast, endless desert of the southwestern United States, where the sun blazes down upon the dry, dusty earth and the wind sweeps across the land, there was a young Apache girl named Aita. She wasn't like the other girls in her tribe. Aita was known for being wild, untamed, and full of energy. From a young age, she had always felt the urge to run, to be free, to explore the world around her without anyone telling her what to do. The other people in her village often spoke in hushed tones about how different Aita was. She was too wild, they would say. She didn't follow the rules, didn't do things the way others expected her to. Aita's father had died years ago, in one of the many conflicts between the Apache and the settlers who had started to claim land in the area. Her mother was kind and loving, but Aita could always feel the weight of loss hanging over their small family. Her mother's face would often show signs of worry, and Aita could feel the tension in their village. The settlers and the Apache people had always lived in a delicate balance, but the arrival of more and more settlers had made it harder to keep peace. There were always whispers about war and fighting, about who owned the land and who had the right to it. This made Aita even more determined to remain true to herself. She did not trust the settlers, and she did not care for their ways. She hated feeling like she had to fit into their world. To her, the land belonged to her people, and no one had the right to take it away. Her rebellion was not one of violence or anger, but of freedom. Freedom to roam, to ride, to live as she wished. Aita loved to ride horses. More than anything else, it was the one thing that made her feel truly free. She would spend hours on the back of a wild horse, galloping across the open plains, the wind in her hair, and the sound of hooves pounding the earth beneath her. The more she rode, the more she felt at home, as if the earth itself was alive beneath her, guiding her every step, far away from Aita's village. Across a wide stretch of land and beyond a range of mountains, there lived a man named James McAllister. He was a lonely rancher who had come from a different world entirely. James had grown up in the East, far from the wide open spaces of the West. He had come to these lands seeking a new life, a life where he could work the land and raise cattle in peace. But peace was often hard to find in a land so divided. James was a quiet man, not one to seek out conversation or companionship. He was a hard worker, focused on tending to his cattle and maintaining his land. His ranch was small, just enough to support him and his work. He had never married, and though he had many opportunities to make friends, he preferred to keep to himself. Life on the ranch was simple but lonely. Most days he would see no one at all. His neighbors were scattered across miles of land, and though there were other ranchers and settlers nearby, their lives seemed distant, and the idea of building friendships felt like too much effort for a man who was content with his own company. One afternoon, while James was checking on his cattle, he noticed something strange in the distance. He saw a figure on horseback moving with incredible skill. The rider was fast, almost like the wind darting in and out of the hills. James squinted against the sun and recognized the rider. It was Aita. Her horse was wild, as if it were untamed, yet Aita guided it with ease. She was a sight to behold, her long black hair streaming out behind her, her body moving with grace, her face set in a determined expression. James watched from a distance, intrigued by what he saw. He had heard of Aita before, of course. She was known throughout the region as the wild Apache girl, too independent, too free-spirited to be tamed. The settlers and even some of the Apache people had whispered about her. She didn't follow the rules, and she didn't care about what others thought of her. To James, there was something mesmerizing about her, something that made her stand out from everyone else he had known. He watched as Aita rode with such confidence, such power, that it was impossible not to be impressed. It was clear that she was no ordinary rider. The bond between Aita and her horse was something special, something deep. It wasn't just a girl riding a horse. It was as if she and the animal were one, connected by some invisible force. For days, James found himself thinking about the girl he had seen on the horse. He had always been curious about the Apache people, though he knew little about their ways. He had heard stories of their skills with horses and their deep connection to the land. But Aita, she was different from the stories. There was something about her that made James think she was more than just a rebellious young girl. One morning, after much thought, James made a decision. He would do something he had never done before. He would offer her a gift, a horse. But not just any horse. He had a beautiful stallion, strong and fast, one of the finest horses he had ever owned. This horse could carry anyone across the land with ease, and James thought that Aita, with her talent and spirit, would appreciate it. The more James thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want anything in return. He didn't want her to be forced to come to his ranch or to become his friend out of some sense of obligation. He just wanted to give her the horse because, in his heart, he believed it was the right thing to do. Perhaps it would help her. Perhaps it would allow her to continue her wild rides across the land, but it would be her choice. So, James prepared the horse. He saddled it carefully, brushing its coat and making sure everything was in place. He knew Aita was a skilled rider, and this horse would be perfect for her. It was not a gift meant to tame her, but one meant to honor her. It was a gesture of respect for her freedom and her independence. When James finally made his way to the place where he had seen Aita before, he didn't know what to expect. He didn't know if she would accept the horse or refuse it, or even if she would be offended by such an offer. But as he approached her, he saw the curiosity in her eyes, the same curiosity that had sparked in him when he first saw her. Without a word, he handed her the reins of the horse. He didn't say anything at first, just allowed the silence between them to speak for itself. Aita looked at him, unsure of what to make of the gesture. She was used to people trying to control her, trying to force her into a box she didn't fit into. But James was different. He wasn't trying to change her, wasn't trying to tell her how to live. He simply handed her the horse, letting her decide what to do with it. For a moment, Aita said nothing. She studied the horse, then looked back at James, and without a word, she took the reins. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with meaning. She didn't need to speak to understand what he was offering her. She took the horse, and in that moment, a silent bond was formed. It was not a bond of words or promises, but one of mutual understanding. James stepped back, watching as Aita mounted the horse, her confidence returning. As she rode off into the distance, the wind whipping through her hair, James knew that he had done something important. He had given Aita something far more valuable than just a horse. He had given her the freedom to be herself, to remain wild and untamed, but with the respect that only a quiet gesture could offer. As he watched her disappear into the horizon, James felt a sense of peace. He had done something kind, something that would forever change the course of their lives. As the days passed after Aita received the horse from James, she began to ride it with increasing confidence. It became her companion, a symbol of the freedom she had always desired but could never fully embrace. The horse was strong and fast, just like her, and together they moved across the open land with a bond that could not be easily explained. Aita's heart swelled every time she mounted the horse. She felt the wind in her hair, the sun on her face, and the earth beneath her feet as if it was alive, breathing with her. It was the purest kind of freedom, the kind that made her feel connected to the land and everything around her. For Aita, riding had always been more than just a way to pass time. It was a way of life, a way to express her independence. The more she rode, the more she learned about the land. She discovered hidden streams, secret pathways through the hills, and quiet, peaceful spots where the world seemed to stop. She would ride for hours, exploring, thinking, and finding solace in the solitude of the wide, open spaces. The horse James had given her allowed her to travel farther than she ever had before. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. However, with this newfound freedom, Aita's connection to the land also came with challenges. As she ventured farther from her village, she encountered settlers who had come to claim land. They would look at her with suspicion and sometimes with hostility. They had heard rumors about the wild Apache girl, and their fear of the unknown made them wary of her. Aita could feel their eyes on her, judging her for simply existing in a place they wanted to control. But Aita never let their gazes affect her. She didn't need their approval, nor did she care for their judgment. She had her horse and she had the land. As far as she was concerned, that was all she needed. But deep down, Aita knew that the world she was so deeply connected to was changing, and that change would eventually force her to confront the tension between the Apache people and the settlers. One afternoon, while riding through a quiet valley, Aita noticed something unusual in the distance. She saw a man on horseback riding toward her. It was James. At first, she wondered why he was out here so far from his ranch, but then she realized that he had probably come to check on her. Over the past weeks, they had exchanged no words, only silent gestures of respect. James never pushed for more than that, but Aita could sense his quiet presence. As James got closer, Aita slowed her horse, waiting for him to reach her. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the wind was soft against her skin. It was one of those rare moments when the world felt completely still, almost as if it were holding its breath. James stopped his horse a few feet away from her, giving her a respectful nod. "You've been riding well," he said softly, his voice carrying across the quiet landscape. It was the first time he had spoken to her directly since offering the horse. Aita nodded in acknowledgement, not saying anything in return. She wasn't much for words, and neither was James. The silence between them was comfortable, even though they both knew that their worlds were so different. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the quiet stretching between them. James had been watching her from afar for weeks, quietly respecting her need for independence. He had seen how she rode with such grace, how she navigated the land as if it were second nature to her. He admired her strength, and there was something about her that made him feel connected to the land in a way he hadn't felt before. But he knew that their paths could never truly merge. She was a free spirit, tied to the land in a way he could never understand. And he was a rancher, trying to carve out a life in a world that was constantly changing. "I brought you some supplies," James said, breaking the silence. He held out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I thought you might need them." Aita looked at the bundle for a moment, then slowly reached out to take it. She had never expected anything from James, yet here he was, offering her something again without expecting anything in return. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to remind her that he understood her need for independence. He didn't try to control her or force her into any kind of relationship. He simply offered what he could, and that was more than enough. "Thank you," Aita said softly, surprising herself with the words. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him, and somehow it felt right. James didn't smile, but his eyes softened, and he nodded in acknowledgement. "I don't mean to intrude," James said after a brief pause, "but I thought you might want to know that there's been talk among the settlers. They're getting more anxious about the Apache people moving through these lands. They're afraid that something might happen, and they're starting to look for reasons to push back." He paused, as if considering whether to say more, but then continued. "Just be careful out there." Ada listened closely. She had heard rumors of growing tension between the settlers and the Apache people, but she hadn't paid much attention to them. She didn't believe in running from what was rightfully hers. But hearing it from James made it feel more real, more immediate. The world around her was changing, and she could feel the shift in the air. "I'll be fine," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I've always been fine." She gave him a steady look, letting him know that she would not be easily swayed or frightened by threats. She was strong, and she would continue to live by her own rules. James seemed to understand. He didn't argue with her or try to convince her to leave the land. He respected her resilience. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. For a moment he found himself wondering if he could ever be as fearless as she was. He had his own battles, but Aita's battles seemed to be on a completely different scale. She was fighting for her freedom, and in a world where freedom was becoming increasingly rare, that was something worth admiring. "Well," James said, his voice breaking the silence, "I'll leave you to it then, just be careful." With that, he turned his horse and rode off into the distance, disappearing behind the hills. Aita watched him go, then turned her gaze back to the land that stretched out before her. The sun had set now, and the stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky. The world felt endless, and for Aita, it was hers to explore. No one could take that away from her. As the days continued to pass, Aita's freedom became both her strength and her burden. The settlers were growing more uneasy, and rumors of conflict seemed to grow louder with each passing day. But Aita was not one to back down. She had been given the gift of the land and the freedom to roam, and she would not let anyone take that from her, and so she continued to ride not as a girl bound by rules, but as a woman who had found her place in a world that was constantly changing. No matter what the future held, Aita knew that her spirit could never be tamed. She would always be wild, always be free, and that was the most powerful thing of all.